So, Will Ashton, should we start this review of No Time to Die with a classic Bond intro?
What would a classic Bond intro be for us, John?
For us? Well, we could maybe just sing a little bit of a tune. We already did the cold open just now, and then it fades into music. We could do a song about how Cinemaholics is as dangerous as it is sexy.
Sure. I was going to say, this is the first Bond film we reviewed, right?
We haven't gotten a Bond film in 6 years, so yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, because...
we missed the boat.
I was going to say, because I didn't realize how long it had been since Spectre had come out.
I remember because I mentioned to you after we saw No Time to Die, I was like, Will, I hope that before we get another Bond film, it's like a decade of time. Mm-hmm. And you were kind of like, oh, maybe, I don't know, a decade's a long time or whatever. But we went 6 years. That's a little over half a decade.
I mean, I think that's traditionally how long Bond films come out, like 3 to 6 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Like 3 years. Let's see. So Casino Royale, 2006. Quantum of Solace was what, 2009?
Yeah, I mean, just
Skyfall 2012.
I'm talking like Bond throughout the years as a franchise, I think.
Oh, you mean in between? So like Die Another Day, that was what, like 2002? I
think, yeah, it was right after 9/11. That was a point of conversation I was going to make later. But yeah, it was 2002, and then what was Casino Royale, 2006?
Yeah, so that was only 4 years of a break.
Yeah.
We got more time in between Spectre and this one.
Yeah, well, to be fair, this was supposed to come out last year. It was ready to go. It was in the can.
Yeah, it would have been 5 years, though, otherwise, which is still longer.
Yeah, though I think the Craig films have traditionally taken longer after Quantum of Solace.
That was a good song intro that we just did right now.
Sure.
This is Cinemaholics. I'm John Negroni. He's Will Ashton.
Yes. Hello.
Yada yada.
Yeah.
I think toward the end of this show, because this is a bonus episode, obviously, we're gonna do spoilers. We're gonna talk about No Time to Die. Now it's opening in the UK this weekend. So if you're listening to this before October 1st, if you're listening to this before October 8th when it opens in the US, don't worry. We're not going to spoil anything about the movie. We're going to tell you what we thought. Toward the end, though, we will get into spoilery stuff. So you can pause it, watch the movie when you can, or maybe you're a critic or somebody who saw it early. Maybe you went to an advanced screening. You can listen to it in that case as well, because we have a lot of stuff to talk about in a little bit of a spoilery section toward the end there. But first, the movie. No Time to Die.
Bond, any thug can kill. I have to know I can trust you.
Well, I understand double O's have a very short life expectancy.
You're a kite dancing in a hurricane, Mr. Bond.
Is this really what you want? Always alone?
We used to be able to get into a room with the enemy. Now they're just floating in the ether.
When her secret finds its way out, it'll be the death of you.
Oh my God. Target enough people.
And the people become the weapon.
Who is he?
James, you don't know what this is.
James Bond. Licensed to kill. In love with Madeline Swan. I could be speaking to my own reflection.
I guess first place to start, Daniel Craig. This is it. No more Daniel Craig as James Bond. We've done that for a while. This was going to be his final bout. And I think it's worth maybe summing up real quick, Will. I mean, the Daniel Craig years. What'd you think?
Yeah, I was going to ask you the same thing. I wanted to ask you first how you felt about Bond in general, like as a franchise, but also Craig.
Like a refresher, because we've talked about Bond.
Yeah, we've talked about Bond a decent bit. Not like in depth though, as far as like we said, we haven't done a review of one of the films, obviously, because we haven't had the chance to do so.
Yeah, we started Cinemaholics in 2017. You and I were first doing movie stuff in 2016. So like, yeah, charting the friendship.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, as far as the Craig Bond films, to answer your question, I've always enjoyed them. I don't think I've had the same nostalgia for them as some of the earlier Bond films. I grew up, I guess, between the Brosnan era and the Craig era.
Yeah, we're Brosnan boys, you and me.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, my introduction to Bond will always be Die Another Day. So for better or for worse, I typically associate Bond with being a little bit goofier, sillier, like the Roger Moore type movies. I think that's in my head canon. That's kind of like how I see Bond, is kind of like goofy and lighthearted, and he's always quick with the quips, and he has the little guns, and he sleeps with various beautiful women, and he takes bad guys out in exotic locales, and he
travels
just
the world.
Yeah,
goes everywhere.
And the Craig films have been like, what if he did all that stuff, but he was just
while sad. Really
sad, yes. Which I think if you're just like a Midwestern guy throwing $12 on the table, and you live a life that's not always happy, you're like, well, maybe I can enjoy some escapism, see the world through the eyes of a suave, charismatic super spy who is always quick with a joke and dashing in every manner. And it's just like, what if he was sad too? And I think Casino Royale, I definitely enjoyed it. I mean, as a return to like kind of it was like the nice little jumpstart that the franchise needed, because Die Another Day, for however you feel about the film, it just felt like a relic from another time by the time it came out in 2002. It was coming off of, like a new time for not only, entertainment, but just like in the world at large. With 9/11, it just seemed antiquated to have like this kind of goofy.
It's a 1999 movie that came out in 2002.
Exactly, yeah. And it was coming out the same year as Bourne Identity, if I'm not mistaken. And Bourne Identity was just kind of, as far as entertainment was concerned, everyone was just like, yes, this is kind of the more timely. Yeah, it was like the more timely, irreverent sort of film that we wanted. Like the action was no hold bars. It was grittier. It felt like when someone got punched in that movie, it felt like someone got punched. It wasn't just like, like slapdash and silly like like Die Another Day could be. So to reflect that, and also I guess in a later respect to reflect the Nolanization of blockbusters, we got the Craig films, which I think with Casino Royale, like we said, was like kind of the boost that it needed. It brought it back down to earth a little bit. Craig had kind of more integrity to him as Bond. Like it felt like he was kind of getting rough and tumble with it. He was fighting the guy in the parkour scene. Like that was like the real moment where I was like, okay, Bond feels electrifying again. This is fun.
He bleeds. He gets hurt. He's vulnerable.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to mention this. I'm glad you brought up Bourne. I was going to mention like that movie is a complete reaction to Jason Bourne. It just is. I mean, Bourne kind of just shook up action movies, especially action spy movies, in a huge way. And clearly that's what the Broccoli's, Barbara Broccoli, the famous, James Bond rights handler, had in mind for this character of like, here's how we bring him into the next generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Craig was always a good fit. Like I never felt like he was bad in the role, but the thing that I guess differentiated Craig from the other Bond, so far as I can recall, is that he had kind of more of a weighted conscience, in the sense that like all the films from Craig's era weren't quite episodic. Like they had a sort of loose but bleeding narrative throughout, where Craig was weighed down by people he lost along the way, the guilt that he felt like doing these terrible crimes in the name of civility and all this stuff.
There's way more continuity in these, compared to the other Bond films. And I think that indicative of this movie, Bond is a dynamic character. He's usually an iconic, static character in all the other movies. He doesn't really change, save for a couple of films here and there in the Roger Moore era.
Yeah. And then I think Quantum of Solace tried to do that in a way that I felt, I think I'm more sympathetic towards that film, but it felt very jittery. Like it felt maybe a little too reactionary to Casino Royale. Like it was, I think, trying too hard to kind of have like an edge to it in a way that people were pretty put off by. It also suffered because the writer's strike prevented the film from having a streamlined script. And so that kind of was like, oh, okay, maybe the Bond films aren't saved like we thought we were with Casino Royale. But then comes Skyfall, which was, like you said before, to borrow your phrase, another shot in the arm. It was, tackling the same ideas. The only big difference now is that somehow between three films, Daniel Craig went from like the young whippersnapper Bond, who is younger and lighter on his feet, to being an old man who is just barely able to hang on as 007. But I think it worked. Like, thematically, it made sense. It was a film that felt like, okay, like, what is Bond's place in the 21st century? And it was really well done, very well shot. Obviously, I forget if Rodriguez didn't win the Oscar for that one, but I remember he was nominated for it. And yeah. And then, great Adele song. It just was like, it had everything that I think people wanted from Bond in the 21st century. But then Spectre comes along, and it felt like it was trying to double down all that stuff. And it's not terrible. It just didn't quite land. They stick the landing, I think, as well as the previous film did, which leads us into No Time to Die, where I think by this point, everyone just kind of feels tired, especially Daniel Craig. It just looks like he's like got these bags under his eyes. Like, it feels like he is just weighed down by this franchise at this point, in a way that I think fits the character as far as like what they want Bond to be in these films. But at the same time, you can't help but wonder, like, what would these films be like if they allowed themselves to have maybe a little bit more fun with the character?
Lots of fun. Craig is having fun. It's so funny because I was thinking about this, and I was kind of like, all right, let's look back on the Bond years. And I know you were hoping to ask me, like, you mentioned this off the air, but you're like, let's talk about your Bond baggage, right? And
Sure.
For me, Bond, like, okay, so my introduction, like a lot of people our age, right, is Pierce Brosnan. GoldenEye comes out, everybody loves it. We're watching that thing on VHS. I wasn't allowed to watch it. Who cares? I have a really cool uncle. So I'm watching that thing and I'm having a great time. My first time watching a Bond movie in the movie theater is Tomorrow Never Dies. The hype for that movie that I played the video game. The internet was still pretty young, but I was finding websites about it. And I was 7 years old, by the way. I was very young, and I was super into James Bond at this point. Tomorrow Never Dies comes out. I absolutely love it unconditionally. I've watched it many times since. That's my nostalgia. World Is Not Enough. Liked it a lot less, but still, I'm a kid. I'm still watching these things. This, in a lot of ways, like James Bond was like the first kind of like adultish, mature movie I had like a fan obsession with. I loved the character. I loved the media around the character. And when those movies come out and I'm starting to get a little bit older, internet's becoming more and more of a thing. That's when I start to discover Sean Connery, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton. That's when I'm like actually like getting into the canon of James Bond. I start watching the older films. I watch things like Dr. No, and I think Goldfinger was like the first classic Bond that I ever watched. And I love every second of it. There's a lot of those movies I like more than others, for sure. A few that I enjoy in a very ironic way. Sure. But it's such a fun canon. 25 films with No Time to Die, and that's where we are, right? Mm-hmm. And there are a few outliers. Well, I mean, there was like the extra one that Connery did. I was going to say before Dr. No, the unofficial James Bond movie.
Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, if it's 26, if you count that extra one from whatever that was, like the 90s or 80s, when Connery was just like, I'm going to play Bond again. And he was like, whatever, like a 60-year-old man.
Broccolis.
Yeah. It was just like he just did it on his own through some like loophole. I guess like the rights to that book or something was outside of the, I don't know exactly know how he got away with that.
I've never seen it.
Yeah.
There are a few Bond films I haven't seen. That's one of them. And
okay, I've seen
one
that
of these days I'll be a completionist.
Yeah, I'm a completionist for Bond. I grew up with the franchise. I've seen all of them. They all kind of bleed together for me because I saw them around the same time, with the exception of the new films, obviously. So, okay. I couldn't like pinpoint exactly like what happens in said film, but I have some nostalgia at least for the franchise as a whole. Like I really enjoy the franchise. I do think it's the rare sort of franchise where it's kind of like pizza in that like even the weaker Bond films are still pretty watchable and have their charms.
It's cheap. It's pizza. I like
it. Exactly. Okay. Yeah. Some of them are, higher grades than other, but like if you put on a Bond film at cable, like there's a decent chance you'll get something out of it if you just kind of watch it passively. It's just, the action's always fun. The set pieces, it's kind of hard with all the gadgets and all that. It's hard to make a truly unwatchable Bond film, no matter how people feel about Quantum of Solace. Mm-hmm.
they are amusing time capsules in a lot of ways too. You know, it's a fun way to go back in time to sort of see what are the attitudes and the sensibilities of the people who like this, especially the Bond movies from the 80s. What a weird decade for Bond. 70s too, to an extent. Yeah, like as soon as Connery was out of it.
But I think the key to Bond's longevity is that like it's just male wish fulfillment. It's just a way for guys, in particular, not to say that women can't enjoy it, obviously, but men in particular, there's just something, you know, like, what if we could just go around the world and have a martini and, you know, say the right thing at the right time and all this stuff. And it's very slight sort of entertainment. Like, I think the Bond films I'm more nostalgic for don't have any pretenses about what they are. They just kind of have, like, I think they can be very good films, but like Goldfingers you mentioned is probably, I think, like the quintessential Bond film, in that it has everything you want in a Bond film, and it gets the job done, and it has something to say about Bond as a character, but for the most part, it's entertaining and fun, and I think I find myself, I guess, watching these films a little nostalgic for those, in the sense that, like, I think these films are so caught up in what they want to say about the character that they sometimes forget to have fun. And that's not to say that these films are boring or anything like that all the time, but I do feel like, especially with these two most recent Bond films, that it's becoming apparent that the franchise, if it wants to compete with, say, Fast and Furious or Mission Impossible in particular, or like John Wick or anything like that, it kind of needs to, it kind of needs to like get out of its moody phase and do something a little bit, I guess, more fun loving, I guess. I just feel like everything, it's kind of,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's where Quantum of Solace fell short. It didn't have an identity. You know, the identity carved out in Casino Royale kind of dissipated. And I think that, you know, and I have a couple of other things I want to mention, but I think that they did sort of carve out this is our style. We're a prestige international action feature. That's kind of what Skyfall is. I think that's what No Time to Die is. It's like, this is elevated Mission Impossible, and they kind of moving. I think No Time to Die is trying to add some of the fun stuff in there too, and it doesn't always go together super well. Sometimes it's like popcorn and Bunch of Crunch. You don't think it would go together, but it's kind of cool.
Yeah. I see it as like Men's Health magazine as a film franchise. Like, it's kind of classy, but it has some like sleaze to it at the same time. And it's just like there is an air of like sophistication to it, but at the same time, at the end of the day, it's just about like cheap pleasures and, like, you know, just kind of enjoying it in the moment and just moving on. That's how I always saw Bond as a franchise. Sure. That's a movie franchise, at least. I can't speak to the books. Yeah.
I haven't read the books either, but yeah, I mean, look, what I like about these movies, they're elemental. Right. You know, you mentioned it, the male wish fulfillment. I think going even deeper, he's a character that I think is so fun because he's like an accessible, clever Superman. We know that the guy's basically bulletproof. He's going to get out of all his messes. And in a way, it's not like a comic book, because it's a little bit more grounded. So you're able to sort of be in his shoes a little bit better. And that's obviously changed more with the Craig films. And it's very elemental movie making, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's easy. Like, okay, the setup, here's Q with all the gadgets. We know the gadgets are going to come into play. The fun is seeing like the setup payoff throughout the film. And, you know, you forget about like the gadgets right when they need it, especially when you're younger, like when we're watching those movies as kids, because you're enraptured by all these amazing locations and the femme fatales and all this fun stuff that's like scattered throughout. And it's a formula that really works. It's predictable, but it's really satisfying for a certain audience.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I was kind of amused when you mentioned that this was like your quote unquote first adult film, or one of your first adult films, because for me, it's always like been a fairly boyish franchise. It's kind of like for how like in the earlier years or the earlier generations, I mean, they had like kind of like these like serialized Westerns where they could just like kind of like as a kid, like you could watch them on like black and white TVs and like have like a little toy gun, shoot with like the bad guys and all that stuff. I feel like that's like kind of like how I see the franchise as well. It's like, it's a way for, like young, you know, adolescent boys to kind of enjoy this weird, it's a very European look into a very formulaic tropey type franchise, but one that has a solid foundation more often than not, and has very enjoyable delights throughout.
If I can clarify, these weren't my first adult movies. What I was trying to say there was these were the first movies that, as a kid, that were for adults mainly, but I was like in a fandom. Right. It was like my first adult fandom that I was really like in. Like I was obsessed with the character. Like it was so different from if I saw something like right? Any of the John Carpenter films. If I saw Halloween, I wasn't really big, like I wasn't a fan of like Halloween movies until I was a bit older. I was a younger teenager. But this was when I was like 6, 7, 8 years old. I'm like, I love the character. I love the lore around the character. I was going to mention earlier too that for me, Brosnan represents like my childhood in a lot of ways, because Goldeneye comes out like I think when I'm like 4 or 5 years old. Those movies are coming all the way out until I'm a teenager. And then the first Daniel Craig movie comes out when I'm 16. And I can kind of look at, oh, wow. So up until this point, the Daniel Craig Bond films kind of represent my coming of age of when I'm 16 years old all the way up. Now I'm in my 30s, right? And I can kind of like, it's fun. I can sort of like trace back a lot of life moments through these films and kind of the journey of that. And for me, that's where the nostalgia is. It's very recent nostalgia, but it's potent because I definitely have seen myself sort of like change as somebody who loves film over these years and analyzing these different movies. And I think that's why No Time to Die kind of in the way that it culminates, and I guess it's time to talk about the actual movie. There's a lot in this movie that I find myself really fascinated with as a longtime fan that I want to get into, because I wrote this in my review. I think No Time to Die is like this interesting cocktail of all of these different things that do or don't work in the Daniel Craig Bond movies, and some extra bonus flavors from some Brosnan and Roger Moore stuff, I think. And I mentioned it's like, this is like the super high level part of my review of it, but for me, it has like on the plus side, it has like the really like complete story of Casino Royale. I know that film kind of ends on a cliffhanger, but for me, I think the narrative of Casino Royale is very easy to just, it could be standalone. I know that they keep bringing stuff up from that movie and pretending like there are loose ends, but there really aren't that many in the first film. And I think that like that the integrity of that narrative, we have that in No Time to Die, I think, at least in my opinion. I think we have the really creative set pieces and cinematography and just everything technical just being right on point that we get in Skyfall. But then we have the negatives from Quantum of Solace and Spectre. Quantum of Solace is, I think, very weak villain, and where that movie kind of just is going along to go along. It feels like a part 2 to another movie. You know, this is No Time to Die is like the part 2 to Spectre. And then speaking of Spectre, I think like in that movie, we have just this very like mess of lore and stuff of like, you had to have seen Spectre and all of the sort of like, we're so caught up in the legend of James Bond way more than tell a new story, tell a different story about James Bond. I think that's where this movie suffers. Like that and the villain, I think, and the length a little bit too, are where this thing kind of falls apart. But what do you think?
No, I think you broke it down pretty well in that, like, yeah, I think, like you said, the legacy of Bond is becoming such a shadow over the franchise that it almost prevents Craig's films from having their own sense of self in some respects. Like they feel like they have to like kind of, they constantly feel like they have to prove themselves even 5 films in, like what they're trying to do, what their vision is. Like I said, it's a cohesive vision for the most part, I think. And I think they're more often than not pretty well made films, and they have, like we said, like this kind of classy air of sophistication as far as how they present themselves or how they approach filmmaking or action or anything like that. But at the same time, yeah, it does. It's hard not to feel the length and the weight of this thing, just because it's trying to do so much, trying to say so much about the franchise and the character and all this stuff, to the point where the escapism starts to suffer as a result. And that's not to say that the film isn't pleasurable or entertaining to watch, but especially I think in the second half of this thing, you do feel like the kind of the burden of the character in a way that I don't think was necessarily intended by the filmmakers.
I think that's right on. Yeah. I want to set this movie up too, because we haven't gotten into the details. So who made this movie? Who is the mind behind it? We've gotten Sam Mendes for the last 2 films. And I think, yeah, Mendes did a terrific job with Skyfall. We mentioned Roger Deakins. I think there was a different cinematographer for Spectre. I think
the
he was before, wasn't he?
Interstellar guy. I forget. I don't know how to pronounce his name.
I'm forgetting his name, and I think I know. Was it No, this one was Linus Sandgren.
Yeah, no. Spectre was shot by like Hote. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but like it's
I'll
the
have
guy.
to look it up.
Yeah,
I know who you're talking about though. Yeah. Which Spectre, I'd say like Spectre has some really good moments. I don't think the cinematography is bad in that movie. I just think that it's not quite up to what I liked about Skyfall. Like I don't remember the set pieces nearly as like closely. It's like I remember total moments out of Spectre and a lot of production design and everything, which is a whole job.
Yeah, I mean, Spectre for me, especially rewatching the film before this review, it's very clear to me that like it's a movie of moments, but I don't really remember the story. For instance, like I had forgotten until I rewatched the film that Hot Priest guy was in it, and he plays a fairly prominent antagonist in the film.
I forgot that too.
Right. I just like, I mean, it's just kind of going through the motions story-wise, I feel like, especially with, I'm sorry if this is a spoiler, but Blofeld being in the film and all that. It's another, like we said, like film that's like kind of caught up in like, we have to do Blofeld because, you know, like it's the most, it's, you know, like it's the Lex Luthor of the Bond franchise. And it's like, we kind of have to like throw him in here. But the way that they integrate Blofeld into this franchise is very reminiscent of Star Trek in the Darkness, where it's like they're almost sort of ashamed that they're introducing Blofeld into this. They're like, well, we kind of have to do this. We're sorry.
Well, and also the movie lends so much dramatic weight to that revelation, and a lot of people are going to be like, okay, and they try to. That's the thing. It's just like, you know, the Wrath of Khan thing. He's like, oh, he's Khan. It's like it's only a moment if you are caught up on the franchise. And I think that that's a weakness. I mean, that's a downside. I think like that, the thing that they try to do with it though, is they try to like say like, oh, they try to retcon. He was behind everything across every movie. And I think it rings super hollow because the previous movies kind of established like what really happened already. And so it just feels like they're rewriting it in order to lend dramatic weight to something for people who don't know or care who Blofeld is. It's a shame too, because I mean, Christoph Waltz, who shows up again in this movie in No Time to Die, he should be like, he was a great Bond villain before he was in any Bond films. A lot of people were like, put him in a Bond film. Yeah. And I think that it was a bit of fan casting that didn't quite work for me, because I think it was almost too on the nose. Yeah.
But I mean, I will say I agree with you in that I think the villain of this film is ultimately the weakest of the franchise. I mean, I do push back against the Quantum of Solace. I don't think he's an amazing villain, but I think what they were doing with that villain is pretty interesting, especially as far as like what his intentions were actually like pretty good. He just had the wrong way of going about it, you know, because he sacrificed human life for that.
Yeah. I guess I just thought he felt like an afterthought. So I don't know.
Probably. I just think the idea of the character is interesting. So I mean, I don't hate the villain. But with this film, it's like
can I say the villain of this film? One thing I do find interesting, and you can get into it for sure. I do like that they are kind of. I like how they're handling the Dr. No thing. They're clearly trying to do the Dr. No thing without him actually literally being Dr. No. And I wish that's how we had done the Blofeld thing. It's like set him up in a way where it's the same thing, but you don't lend this like big twist element to it. It's like, no, they're just sort of recycling it, but twisting it in an unusual way. And I think in concept, like the theory of it's a good one, but otherwise.
But with Rami Malek's character in this film, especially for what's essentially a 3-hour film, we see him at the beginning of it, obviously, and I think that's a pretty good cold open in more ways than one. But
yep.
But the movie's like trying to do so much this time that's just like 90 minutes in, it's just like, hey, are we forgetting something? Like, oh, what do you mean? Like, oh, there's something. Oh, the villain. We got to put the villain back in the movie, and so like. You know, like after like this long pause, like it's like, oh yeah, I forgot about the villain of the movie. He's here too. Yeah, we should kind of establish him, I guess, in this narrative. I think
they give him like maybe one scene in the second act, like the early parts of the second act. I mean, it's hard to put this movie into acts; it's so long. But I'm just thinking of like they give him one scene, and it's such a bad scene, because it does not really get across, like you can't really put heads or tails on it. And I think without giving away like certain elements of the plot, I think that they're trying so hard to make you question who is bad in this movie. And they're trying to set up like, oh, maybe this person was lying about what they said. Maybe this person's secretly evil. That, to your point, we can't have like real interactions between the villain and any of the other characters, because it's like they want to keep it a secret for some reason. And it's a big downside. Although I do think that they kind of bring a villain into this movie who we won't say who he or she is, but I was confused because I was like, well, if they're the villain, why aren't they like, I don't know, this movie just does things with these characters that aren't satisfying. It's like they set something up. There's this big like antagonism. There's going to be a big, and then it's just like really quick. how it all resolves. Like that happens like 2 or 3 times in this.
Yeah. I mean, but I don't necessarily mind that as much, but I think that's a fair criticism. But yeah, with the villain, I agree with you. I think it almost feels like the film is disappointed that the previous film used the Blofeld card already, because like it would have made way more sense to use Blofeld as the villain of this movie, as far as like where they lead up with that character, because it would have been okay if the villain wasn't an afterthought in this, if it wasn't so crucial that the villain play a big part in the third act. And I think that's where the film ultimately kind of gets on wobbly legs, because I mean, maybe this is where we disagree, but I think the first half of this movie is actually really solid and well made. And I was with it and I was like, okay, maybe this will be like the appropriate predecessor to Skyfall and Casino Royale. Like I think Cary Fukunaga is like really strong as an action director, and I think his
we forgot to mention him. He's a director for this one. Yeah, yes. He's good. He's a good director.
And if I'm not mistaken, this is the first American director to make a Bond film, right?
I think he's the first. I'd have to fact check that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I remember that was kind of a big deal in a way that like whenever like they change something with the Bond franchise, it kind of becomes like British tabloids like get upset about it for like half a second and then they like get over it. Like for instance, you remember when it was announced that Daniel Craig was going to be Bond and people were like, a blonde Bond? Like, can we have this? Is this allowed to have a blonde Bond? And then, people got over it because they saw Casino Royale.
Yeah. There was also weirdness about Martin Campbell because he's from New Zealand and,
oh, okay.
People are weird.
Okay. Well, I guess, yeah. So he's not a European director, but this is, I believe, the first American filmmaker to make a Bond film. And I think, obviously the Brits are very protective of Bond for understandable reasons. It's like one of their biggest outsources as a country. But yeah, I mean, I think Cary Fukunaga has proven himself, and I think he does a nice job for the most part. But I think he just kind of feels like he's like at the service of the franchise here. Like I think he puts his own touches, and if you look at the film, like it's clear that it's a Fukunaga film, especially given that it's the first Fukunaga film I think we've gotten since Beast of No Nation, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel as fully realized as previous films, because he's basically not like a director for hire, but like he's here in the service of the franchise and kind of getting Craig to the final destination, which we'll talk about obviously later on. But yeah, I kind of wish there was more Fukunaga's hand in it as far as like a filmmaker, but I think what he's doing here is for the most part entirely competent.
Yeah, so Fukunaga, I think he's probably best known for True Detective. He was the director of, I think, all 8 episodes of the first season.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken about that.
Yes.
I mean, that's really like, that's back like 2014-ish. That's really when he comes on the scene. I know he did the Jane Eyre movie before that, but I don't think that had as big of a splash.
Sin Nombre was a big festival darling, and then he did.
It was
Jane
a festival
Eyre.
darling, but I'm thinking more of like a bigger kind of like film. That was kind of like an indie thriller.
Yeah.
But Beast of No Nation was supposed to be, Beast of No Nation was after that, but it was supposed to be like the bigger thing, right? It was supposed to be his big Oscar push, but because of the whole Netflix shenanigans, like that movie, which, he directed it, he wrote it, I think he even shot that film. And it had Idris Elba like in a real Abraham Mattar. I think that they should have gotten some Oscar attention, but because of the Netflix shenanigans, it got totally snubbed. Wouldn't have happened if it come out like last year, right?
Yes.
And then to your point, I think he's only done one other film since, but he was the screenwriter for it. And I think that's it, because he did Maniac. And, I'm getting to it. And but
I was gonna say he's like a very particular filmmaker. Like I think he has like a very specific vision for things. And I know like he's like kind of gone on and off of projects, sort of like Fincher, because like he's very like he has a very like exacting style about that, which is why I'm kind of surprised that this movie didn't feel more like a Fukunaga film in the scheme of things.
Sure. He has another thing coming out on Apple TV, I think by the end of the year, called Masters of the Air. He directed some episodes of that. Okay. But yeah, I mean, obviously very talented guy, and I think that you can see his stamp on this movie. There are times when there are just like placements of like Asian like iconography and touches that are seemingly random, but other times I think that they go really well together to make the actual locations feel very unique and interesting and memorable. But I think when it comes down to, I actually don't disagree with you. You mentioned this earlier. I think I'm with you on the first half of this movie. I think the first half of No Time to Die, I was like, I'm loving this. This is like exactly what I wanted from the last Craig film. I think it's a really great combination of things. But then, yeah, to your point, it's like once you start to notice, it's like, okay, the villain isn't really going to be that satisfying here. Like I just don't think this film is prioritizing the villain. They're really prioritizing Léa Seydoux's character. It's a bit like The Living Daylights in that respect, and I'm fine with that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think that, yeah, sure. Like, go ahead and do that. I think, like, I don't know. I think the movie that was intending for both to sort of have like an equal sort of relationship, a little bit closer to, I'd say, Casino Royale. I think Casino Royale did this the best, where I think Vesper, and I think, I forget his name, but Mads Mikkelsen's character in Casino Royale, I think it's like, that struck such a perfect balance between the Bond girls, obviously very crucial to the story, but so is the villain, and the villain is very subversive too. And I just, when it comes, if I have to pick a favorite, I think Casino Royale is still the champ. Like, there's nothing about that movie.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not the best at everything. It doesn't have the best things from the Craig era, but I just think if you look at like an all around great James Bond movie, that's probably the one. I don't know. I think some people say Skyfall, but not me.
Yeah, I mean, I rewatched the Craig films leading up to this review, and initially I was with you. I considered Casino Royale to be the best Craig film, but I was really won over this time rewatching Skyfall. I still think it's a little too self-serious because it's a Sam Mendes film, and I don't think the man's ever told a joke in his life. But I do think that that film, especially on rewatch, just really scratched the itch that was one from Bond this time around. So I'll give that one the edge this time. But I think Skyfall and Casino Royale were obviously the heights of the Craig era, and I think you'll find few people that dispute that. But yeah, I'm very curious to know where No Time to Die falls for people. I'm guessing I think critically it's going to be well received. I think among fans it's going to be kind of divisive for reasons I'm sure we'll discuss later on.
I think what I'm seeing a lot of effusive praise right now so far from critics mostly. I'm seeing some people I think like a lot of people are saying, okay, it's not as good as Casino Royale and Skyfall, whether or not you kind of swap those two as your fave. People are kind of being like, it's like comfortably in the middle, like the third best, really, which is really good. And
yeah, that's where I'd put it.
An improvement over the other two, Spectre and Quantum.
Yeah, that's where I put it. I mean, like I said, I don't think Craig ever fully fumbled the ball. Not that he had like full creative involvement with the films, but I think his era as Bond was for the most part pretty strong. But at the same time, I feel like Skyfall and Casino Royale was like the two times where he really got it right, and the other three films are like, yeah, these are good. Like they're like, if you watch them, especially if you like watch the action scenes on their own, it's just like, yeah, this is really solid, well-made filmmaking. But as a franchise, like if you were to evaluate it on its own terms, you can't help but feel like it's a little lacking, because not only is it so burdensome in what it's trying to do and say about the character, but like you said, it's so beholden to the franchise and the character's legacy that can't really ever fully stand out on its own and be its own little thing in the way that I think the other previous Bond films, for the most part, were able to do, at least as far as like the character or the actor arcs of their time with the characters.
Yeah. I was going to mention, it's like a checkerboard, it's been reliably, every other movie has been really good. And then the other one has been not as good. And that lasted with all six, or I guess 5 of these, huh? But yes. I know I'm very curious, like how this movie would have turned out if Danny Boyle had ended up doing it instead. I'm glad we got Fukunaga, because I think he had a really fresh perspective for this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was going to mention too, because we didn't say the story, and I didn't get into the plot either in my review. I think that it's not important to get into, and I think that it is one of those movies where I think the plot is also kind of an afterthought. I mean, it's basically kind of doing Mission Impossible 2, like in terms of like subject matter, and we got to get the thing for the there's a disease, and then I'm sure I wasn't even aware that was part of the plot until I saw the movie, and I was like, oh gosh, no wonder. Like they were one of the first movies to be like, okay, we gotta get far away from COVID. Sure. And, ultimately they weren't able to get far away enough, but it is kind of darkly funny you know, how this movie, if it had come out like just a little bit earlier, you know, like they would have avoided the obvious comparisons. Although I think coming out right now, I think a lot of people are going to watch it. It'll be like a momentary like, but then you just kind of forget about it because, you know, we've gotten used to it at this point.
Yeah, it's just part of our lives now, I guess.
Yeah, I was also going to mention Lea Seydoux. I don't dislike her. I think that her character is badly written. I think that was the case in Spectre. I think there's just the weirdness element of how she is like the daughter of the guy who gets murdered in Casino Royale. And they just never really get to the heart of that, do they? But yeah, her is like the true love of James Bond. Right. It's kind of like, sure, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that like when you watch Casino Royale, like there's that scene where Eva Green and Daniel Craig meet on the train, and it's just like the spark is instantaneous, and it's just like, oh yeah, like these two are like, you know, like get a room, you two, like these two, like they're gonna like, you know, like they got it. But and even like to some extent like Naomi Harris and Daniel Craig, like they're not like meant to be lovers, but there is like that chemistry that they share together. So like even if it would have been weird, but they had made a money penny relationship with Bond, it would be like, okay, I can at least buy it because they have chemistry. But well, yeah, with like Lea Seydoux or Sudex,
Lea Seydoux, I think is how you pronounce it.
Like you said, good actress, but like, yeah, I just kind of felt like, yeah, like I could buy them as like a fling. Sure. You know, like they seem nice and together, and they get along. It seems. Yeah, but. Yeah, I was like, yeah, when I saw this movie, had not rewatched Spectre beforehand, only afterwards, I was just like, oh yeah, like I forgot about Lea Seydoux, and like watching, it's like, oh, I guess they're supposed to be the love of each other's lives, like I guess.
They keep invoking Vesper Lynd, Eva Green's character, as like, this is a romance to rival that one, and you know, we're kind of watching like, no.
Right.
Yeah, I don't feel that here, and I'm not sure exactly what it is. I think we haven't gotten into some of the new additions though, because we've seen Lea Seydoux in this before. Naomi Harris is back. Ben Whishaw is the voice of Paddington. Ray Fiennes, they're perfect. But we get a couple of newbies here. We get Lashana Lynch as the new 00, who kind of pops into the film. She's like a bit of a rival, right? She's like, I got my mission. He's retired, and you know, don't get in my way. And she's kind of like, you know, I think there was like a big firestorm, right? Of like, her is like the next 007. We can't do that because of racism.
Was it racism or was it because she was a woman?
Both.
Oh, sure. But which one more so than the other for vehement fans online that were angry about it?
I haven't waged an experiment or like a control system, but whatever, I assume it's like a very, very unhealthy dose of both.
Yeah, that's a dangerous quarry, I guess. Is the internet more racist or more sexist?
Yeah, it's a question I don't need answered. But I think that like, I think some people disagree with me on this. I've had a couple conversations already where people really love Lashana Lynch in this. And I like her too. I just think that the movie doesn't treat her very well. I think that she just doesn't get a lot of really good moments in this movie, at least in my opinion. Like she gets some, but there are just times in this movie where she has to like do things and I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's just so, there's a moment where she says something in a room with James Bond and it's just so like outside of like the movie's parameters and it makes no sense. It's outside of the character. And I'm like, I don't know, just give me the assured, confident version of this character who doesn't, you know, kowtow to, I don't know. I don't want to get into it more because it happens later in the film, but I don't know. Where did you stand on Lynch?
I thought she was good. As far as like, I thought the performance was good, and I thought it was an interesting character. I agree with you that, especially in the second half, it kind of just felt like the movie was just like, well, she can't fully be 007. Like, it kind of felt like they got cold feet after a point, and they just decided like, well, that was enough. Like, we did what we need to do. But like, I thought they cast the part well, and I thought, you know, if they had kept her around for future films, I would have been interested to see her character grow and develop. Though I imagine it would be kind of similar to like what happened with Naomi Harris, where like you see her in Skyfall, and it's like, oh yeah, she seems like a great addition. Like hopefully she's a great part of the franchise. And then like Inspector, she's like an afterthought. And it's like, oh, okay.
She gets some fun in this though. We'll table that discussion though of like the future of the franchise, because I have some questions I want to ask you about that once we open this up for spoilers. And we should probably wind down soon. But last thing I want to mention Ana de Armas.
Yes.
Ana de Armas, she's the new fan fave, right? She gets introduced. I mean, we get Jeffrey Wright. He comes back. Love Jeffrey Wright. And
Felix.
His character. Felix gets such a great, send off in this in general.
Yeah. I think the only, is he the only other actor besides Craig to be in all 5 of these?
Ooh, maybe. Because I don't think.
Or was he?
Yeah. I don't think we have Q. Ben Whishaw.
Yeah, I think he's in all 5. I think he's on all 5 of them.
Might be the case.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what I love about Ana de Armas comes in. She's like one of the CIA agents. She's only in one scene.
Right,
it's a
that
long
surprised me.
extended scene, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of figured because like all the scenes we saw for her in the trailer, she had like the same blue dress
Same
on.
outfit.
So it was like,
yeah.
But like even so when she's just like, all right, I gotta go. It's like, wait, where are you going? Come back. Come back.
See you later.
Yeah.
She comes into the movie and I think I said this in my review, she's an instant fan favorite. I think she's going to be one of the most like uncontroversial, things about this movie that everybody can just come together and be like, yeah, that was a really great part of the movie. I think one of my favorite scenes in general.
Yeah, because she has the chemistry established with Knives Out. So like she already had a great rapport with Daniel Craig. So it's like, okay, it makes sense that she's in this. She does a great job. And it's like, yeah, like one of the best scenes of the film for sure.
Even more broadly speaking, I just think you mentioned it before. She's having fun and Craig is having fun with her. Like there is just this immediate, like they're together on screen and you're like, I want to watch these two go on all kinds of missions. Like watching them sort of bounce off of each other, their personalities contrast. He's a little bit like, they try to do this with Lashana Lynch's character too, and I don't think it works quite as well. Where she represents the next generation of the spy craft, he's the old guard. And they're doing the same kind of thing with Ana de Armas here, where, she's she's fresh out of training and everything. And he's just sort of like, oh boy, here we go. And he tries to like woo her with his charms, but she is like not having it. And there's just this really great sort of like driving energy between them that's way more unpredictable. And I'll say it again, it's fun. Like it's really fun. And it's sad that it only lasts a scene. Maybe that's for the best because then it doesn't get ruined. But yeah, I think that for a lot of people, the movie might actually peak at this point, which is, a good. I guess like it's that good, and the rest of it's not that it's bad. But yeah, there was no moment in this movie where I was smiling and having as much fun.
I think it's the one part of the movie that doesn't overstay its welcome.
There you go.
Yeah.
Although I guess I disagree slightly. Well, yeah, because by the time I get to the third act, I'm tired. I'm like, please no more. Like this is too long. But there is one scene involving one of the like surprise villains, and we're in this sort of like foggy Norwegian location, and it's building up to this big epic battle, and it's just cut short. Like it's so like just a quick thing happens and it's over. And I was a little bit like, oh, that's kind of a letdown. But all right. That's everything I have to say about No Time to Die in general. I mean, I really like this movie. I think it's better than it isn't. And like, obviously, if you're a fan of any of the Daniel Craig movies, you got to watch. You already know you're going to watch it. So what are we doing? Yeah,
I mean, I guess for as much as I like it, and I think there's a lot of stuff I really think is good and worth champion, but also like by the end of it, I didn't feel like, hurrah, like we did it, like Bond, hit it out of the park. I just kind of felt like tired, like, man, maybe I should take a nap after this. Like it was just like you feel like Craig in this is just like, all right, I did it. I fulfilled my obligation to this. Not that I think he like hates making these movies, so he certainly has said otherwise in some interviews. But I think the thing that I remember the most about Craig's time as Bond is just how tired he is, which I feel like shouldn't really be the case with Bond. Though, I mean, obviously this is a different interpretation of the character, and they want to do something, with a more of a moral conscience, like we said. So I understand that, but I'm hoping the next Bond, whatever that might be, is a little bit more willing to have fun with the part and have a little bit more zany silliness with it. I think. Well,
I should have mentioned, I think he is having fun. Like he's making jokes in this. He's kind of breaking away from that a bit here. It's not a lot, but I mean, there are more quips and one-liners here. There are times when he's just sort of like exasperated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they make him kind of corny in this at times. And I thought that was kind of nice. I mean, it wasn't enough, I think, to define his stamp on the franchise, but it's something.
Yeah. Well, I think it's better at establishing that tone that I think Spectre was trying to do at the same time. Like, I think, like I said, this is like a continuation of Spectre, but that was also like you could tell with that film, they're like, okay, we got a little, like we heard the criticisms, we got a little too self-serious. Like maybe we'll have a little bit more zaniness in this film. But with that film, it didn't really quite strike that balance as well. Like it tried to do that, but I think for the most part, like I said, Sam Mendes doesn't seem like the type of person that cracks jokes. Maybe he's different at parties. I don't know. I've never met the man, but it just seems like he doesn't really know like how to add humor into his films. And I think that's not the case with Cary Fukunaga. I think he's a little bit more self-aware of that and able to find that balance a little bit easier. Maybe would have benefited from having a little bit more humor to upset some of the bleakness of the film, but I guess that's not really here nor there.
Sure. We're going to get lots more Daniel Craig and lots more things. I think with Logan Lucky, Knives Out, and I think this movie feels a little bit like Daniel Craig kind of learned from those movies that people like him when he's kind of unleashing a little bit. And I think Fukunaga kind of gave him that room, which is really great to see. So Craig's time on the big screen, I don't think is near being over. And that's obviously great for everybody. Will, did you see the Rotten Tomatoes score for this yet? It's still in flux, obviously, but
yeah, I was gonna say this might be outdated by the time the movie comes out in the US, but I have not actually seen the Rotten Tomatoes score for this film.
Yeah, I mean, so 123 reviews have been counted. We'll probably get 123 more, right?
Sure.
Before all is said and done. But we already have a critical consensus, and I think, I don't expect this will move that much. I think this might go higher, if I had to guess. But what is your best guess for what the score is right now? I kind of gave you a couple of hints there.
Sure, because I think traditionally speaking, and obviously this is speaking very broadly, but British critics are more reserved in their praise than U.S. critics, I think. Is that fair to say? More often than not? I'm assuming it's primarily British critics that have seen the film so far. I
don't want to generalize. I think a lot of American critics have gotten into it, though. Right? I think a lot have, because the screenings. We saw it and we put in our reviews out. So I don't think it skews too much in one or the other direction.
So I'm gonna say 83%.
That's what it was yesterday. It is now 85%.
Okay.
And I just to play around a little bit more. What do you think Spectre was?
Oh, Spectre I think was like 64 or something like that.
63 out of 365 reviews. That's a lot of reviews. What do you think Skyfall was?
Oh, Skyfall was like 94 or something like that.
Also close, 92. I'm looking up Quantum of Solace now. What do you
Quantum
think
of Solace was like 58%?
Let's see here.
Or was it 61?
It's loading. 64. Yeah, 58% audience score. That must be what you're thinking of. And then the last, Casino Royale. I'm predicting this is in the 90s, but
yeah, I was gonna say 91%.
Ready to get my heart broken. You say 91?
Yeah,
94. So there we go. I think that definitely proves out the checkerboard thing, right? It's like every other one, but there you go. Yeah, Casino Royale, a little bit higher of a score than this one, and I think that kind of as we already alluded, No Time to Die. I think it'll go up a little higher. I don't think it'll hit the 90s. I think it'll probably maybe get to 87, 88, maybe.
I'll say 84. I think there are going to be some people who are going to be critical of it because of the length, because of where it takes the character.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wonder because it was 83 yesterday, so I'm like, okay, that's movement, but yeah, hard to say.
I think it goes up a little bit and then it goes down usually a little bit when the scores settle.
I should say it was 83 before I put my review in, which was positive. So I'm kind of I don't have any data here. Anyway, that is our spoiler-free section of this movie. There's no audience score. There's no cinema score, so we can't really get into that. But at this point, Will and I, we're going to get to the spoiler corner, and we're going to start throwing spoiled milk at each other. And that's a euphemism for us talking about parts of this movie that you do not want to hear if you haven't watched the movie. So you haven't watched No Time to Die, if you care about spoilers, if you're kind of like, I really just,
or you were
I don't want to get spoiled.
on Twitter and someone just happened to spoil it for you, I guess, because I've heard spoilers are already on Twitter. I didn't see any, but yeah.
I'd say still avoid this because you might, I like operating in the realm of uncertainty. It's like, well, I kind of got spoiled on this, but what if they were joking? What if they're wrong? I don't know. Do what you got to do. That's my point.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, we are going to talk about what happens at the end of this movie. So please go away. We love you. Come back later.
Yeah, come back
again. Yeah, we'll welcome you back with open arms. Will Ashton.
Yes.
We danced around it. I mean, they did it. They did a James Bond movie, the first James Bond movie where he dies.
Yes.
He's gone. There's no ambiguity about it, right?
Right. And we were joking after the movie, like we both, I mean, I honestly thought they were going to do a Dark Knight Rises where like
me too.
like whatever, like they have like the little toast for him and like he was going to like, you just see a hand pick up the glass or you see him at the cottage that they're driving to at the end of the film or something. There would be somehow like, even though, you know, you see that big explosion on islands, like, I don't know how he's going to get out of that one. There's a part of you is just like, surely somehow.
4 times.
Yeah.
But I was expecting it too. I was expecting like, because they set it up right where he finds his daughter's bunny. And we got to talk about that too.
Yeah.
Bond had a child. Bond had a kid. Oh, I have things about that. At first, I was going to say, he finds the toy and they're setting it up like, oh, he's going to get it back to her. But then it's false hope. And then, toward the end, I was like, oh gosh, you know, we cut to like the back seat of the car.
Yeah.
And, you know, she has the toy again. And you're like, what does that mean? You know what I mean?
Right.
I thought they were going to do that. I thought they were going to do it maybe more ambiguously. Of like, maybe he's alive. You never know.
Yeah. But the daughter thing, I don't know, maybe it was just me and maybe I kind of tuned out for a little bit, but I feel like with the daughter, they're kind of like, you see the little girl and you're like, oh, so Bond has a daughter. And then Leah's just like, oh, no, that's not your kid. And Bond's like, are you sure? She has
her, including
like,
him.
are you sure? She has blue eyes like me. It's like, no, that's not your kid. And then like Rami Malek's just like, come on, that's his kid. And then after that, she's like, yeah, it's your kid. And then Craig never has like a moment where he's just like, oh, I have a daughter. Like I have a kid now. He just kind of just like accepts it.
He probably has more.
Well, true, yes. But I felt like narratively, like for a film that's almost 3 hours long, they could have had at least one beat where he's just like, huh. So I have reproduced, like I have brought a child into the world indirectly. Like I feel like that was something in the film that was missing. Maybe they had that scene I just kind of forgot about, or I just was like,
I don't think they do.
Yeah, I was gonna say because I couldn't remember.
I think it's one of those things. He knows the whole time, but I think he understands that she doesn't want her to really be his. She doesn't want him to be the dad. I think that's what they're going after.
Yeah, that makes sense. I get that. I just felt like that was kind of done a bit clumsily in the third act.
What kind of irks me about it a little bit, like I don't hate the decision, but I guess just thinking on a more meta level, it does sort of play into a trope I dislike personally, where. And they do the same sort of thing with Fast and Furious, right? It's like you live this exciting life as a man, right? Like you have these male fantasies where you do all of these action things, but it all ends when you have a kid. And I don't know, there's just something about that. I'm just like, it's not true. Like the adventure's just beginning. And I don't know. And I definitely got the sense that there are alternate endings for this though, because like they set it up of like he's presumed dead, but he probably won't make contact because he has the disease that would kill them. You know what I mean? So like there's all kinds of things that they could have done. And I think that they left it open for that on purpose and then just chose at the final moment, okay, no, he's done. Like we don't want any sort of like bringing him back conversation. So just write him off.
Yeah. But it sounds like you wanted like a movie like a Mr. Mom kind of thing where it's just like Bond
Mr.
comes
Incredibles.
in to see, like Bond goes into M's office just like, what's my next mission? And it's just like, be the best dang dad possible. And it's like it's its most dangerous mission yet, and he's just like in the kitchen trying to like like watch over the baby and doing all these like
he
like
does
some
that
guys
already, right? He cooks breakfast and it's but you brought it up. It's perfect because Incredibles, I love that movie partly because it's about that. It's like sort of subverting that trope in 2004. You know what I mean? 16 years ago, but we're still doing this thing where like the characters sort of, I don't know, they don't do it egregiously here, but there is just this sort of like implicit, okay, once you become a dad and you settle down, this is the next phase of your life. Maybe I'm feeling a little bit bummed, I guess, because like I said before, I chart these movies with my life experiences. Casino Royale comes out when I'm young. I'm ready to face the world. Quantum of Solace comes out when I'm in college and I'm facing some of the first real challenges, that are really starting to define who I am. Skyfall comes out and it's just this big adventure, representing my 20s. I'm like, man, anything is possible. Spectre comes out when I'm really starting to come into my own, but I'm like questioning everything about like, what am I really good at? Like, what is my legacy? Like, am I, really doing what I should be doing? And now this movie comes out where I'm like, all right, like I've really just sort of settled into who I am as a person. And that's a very dramatic spiel. I'm being very over dramatic, but
you're charting a lot on these fun spy action adventure movies, but
sorry. Oh man, it's true though. Another little slice of me. But yeah, no, I'm glad they killed him off. That was the right call.
But I just feel like my whole thing with killing off Bond is like, okay, yeah, like if we're looking at Craig's story as one continuous narrative, it makes sense. Like the idea, like throughout, even going back to Casino Royale, like the idea, like he almost has like a death wish at this point. Like he is like kind of accepting his death all the way back to like Quantum of Solace or Skyfall. So it's like, it's not a matter of like if he's going to die, but just a matter of like when that moment happens and like how many missions can he really do. And that's like, okay, fine. Like it makes sense if you're going to end the Craig story that he actually finally makes peace with his life and dies. But then you see like the end credits and it's like James Bond will return still comes up. And it's like, okay, so it's like, are we just to assume that the next era Bond is just going to be like a total reboot in the way that the other movies are? Are we going off of like, this 007 that we have now is the new 007? I don't really know.
I don't know, because I mean, for the longest time there was that fan theory, right, of like, oh, James Bond 007 is all a code name, and so like you're supposed to take all of the different James Bonds since Connery as like real, but this series really put a pin in that. I mean, it always was questionable, but I think this one specifically was like, no, that's never been a thing. It's not a thing. It's just a recasted, or it's not a recasted. It's just a reboot entirely. So all that being said, like, I don't know, because I think this is so definitive. That's the big difference. Is like Die Another Day doesn't kill off Bond. It just sort of ends the Brosnan era kind of with a whimper. And I'd say the same thing with like Timothy Dalton never really gets off the ground with his. Roger Moore kind of ends unceremoniously. Connery, like we mentioned, just
A View to a Kill
back.
Is a fun time. That's a fun, bad Bond movie.
I agree. But I think with this one, it's like, how do you do another James Bond movie? Like, I don't know. Whoever is going to do that has work cut out for them. Clearly, they have that they in their heads. But what would you prefer? Do you want another James Bond, another specific like this 007 with Moneypenny and Q and M? Like, do you want more of that, or do you want something different?
I think I'd rather just see something different. But I just want. I mean, I like what we have for Moneypenny. Like, I like this new 007 that we have, but at the same time, like, I just feel like it's better to kind of like wipe your hands and just do something different, because like we said, if Bond's legacy and longevity as a franchise is beholden to Bond being a reflection of whatever like people's tastes are, like what they want out of an action franchise. Right now we have like Mission Impossible, Fast and Furious, and like John Wick, where like they have, like these sort of like your traditional like huge stunts, huge set pieces, like big ensemble cast, but they have like a self-awareness and they're cheeky and they, like they have like kind of sly sense of humor in different ways. And I think the Bond films kind of need to do that at this point. They need to be reflective. I don't know if they need to do necessarily the John Wick thing. Like we've gotten plenty of films, action films by now that have been influenced by John Wick for better or for worse. But I do kind of feel like we need to reevaluate the franchise for this new like Zoomer era. Yeah. Like what do they really want, if they want Bond at all? Like he'll come back in some fashion or another. But I don't think it will cater to Zoomers. Yeah,
Zoomers don't care about James Bond, right?
But that's what I mean. Like they have to do. Like I think if they want to keep the franchise going, even if they just try it, like I think they have to do something like a younger Bond.
I don't know. I think that they're going to skew it more toward Gen X and millennials.
Maybe.
Because I don't know. Because what do you do that connects with Zoomers? I think that they're going to be too young. They're not going to, I don't know. I mean, maybe some, like the older end of Gen Z, like where it's a little bit more of like the younger millennial maybe. But I see, that's the thing that's tripping me up about this. It's 'cause I think that I like the idea of like, for example, Dev Patel as James Bond. He's always been my first pick.
I think it should be a biracial Bond. I think that's the next step, would be to make it a biracial Bond.
But then, the step after that is, well, then what's a James Bond story in 2027? And as you already mentioned, I mean, if we do another one, what is the Casino Royale? The sort of like, okay, we're doing something different here. This isn't, because they can't just do a clone of the Craig films. They can't really do, it has to have a new identifier. And like you already mentioned, the big name in action films right now is John Wick, which that doesn't, no, like I think they're smart enough to realize that like that's waning fast. And we don't have like I think the decade just started. We don't have like a new sort of appetite for action films that can inform a new generation of Bond.
Yeah, I mean, I think to justify doing Bond again, you just kind of have to rejuvenate the franchise in some fashion or another, be it like John Wickifying it or something. You kind of have to justify doing it again. Otherwise, I feel like audience, I mean, they might still show up, but there's going to be that air of like, what's the point? Like, what are we doing now? Like, is it just Bond for the sake of Bond, or are we doing something new that actually kind of reflects the times in a fun, inventive way? And like I said, I mean, I think the answer would be doing a biracial Bond, doing something with the character that we haven't seen explored in other films, and getting a filmmaker or like a pair of filmmakers that bring a new stylistic sensibility to it, something that gives it a bit more pulp, a little bit more edge, something that makes it like really fun and silly in a different way, or even, you know, something that feels more emotionally yearning, or something that does something with the character that feels like, okay, like this is totally different. Like, let's see where we go with this avenue. But I don't know what that really is exactly. I mean, that's something the estate has to figure out, not me.
I think that's part of it. I think that, you know, leaning more into the tech, leaning more into the gadgets. We just went through a much more grounded Bond, a more realistic, like he's very vulnerable. What if we had a more technologically astute Bond representing, you know, division and, you know, this society sort of crumbling? Maybe it's about a Bond in a world where, you know, things are slowly dying or something. There's all kinds of things you can do with that. I wonder in terms of like what's informing the next like slew of things. I wonder if they would just not, I don't think they'll do this, but if they did a James Bond series someday instead of James Bond movies, you know, if they're like, well, we're going to do something a little bit more like, it's going to have the budget, it's going to have the prestige of James Bond, but it's going to be not in the movie theater, which I don't think that'll ever happen, but I don't know.
I don't know, man. I mean, if we're looking at like, so, I mean, one of the elephants in the room we haven't addressed is that Amazon now owns MGM. So they have ownership and stake in the Bond franchise moving forward. And you know, like their claim to fame as far as like being a content creator is like Jack Ryan and these like shows that, you know, it kind of appeal to middle-aged dads and all this stuff in the way that the Bond franchise does. And so it wouldn't be out of the question to do like whatever, like a series about like cadet Bond, like in whatever school or training or whatever.
Young
garbage
Bond.
like that.
Well, I was actually going to pitch, I wonder if they would ever do an MI6 show where it's like post No Time to Die and it's about Ray Fiennes, Ben Whishaw, like Naomi Harris, like do a show like that where it's about that crew. You know, maybe they brought in Lashana Lynch too, and it's sort of in that continuity, but it's because like what else do you do with those characters? We love them. What?
Yeah, Agent Cody Banks. Example. Kid detective. Agent Cody Banksing of the Bond franchise.
Kind of. I mean, well, they did Alex Rider, you know, based on the novels and like that. You know, there was a movie for that too, and that was good. That was a good show. I like that
season. Show. I didn't watch it, but I know you were a fan of it.
But I mean, that's a good idea for a show. I don't know. Think about it.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I would rather it continue as a film franchise if they can keep it going as, because like I said, it's like it's one of the biggest action film franchises for a reason. I think they
well, I'm just talking about maintaining the MI6 cast. Like keep them in the mix, because I think if they're going to do another thing, they're going to have to recast all those characters or do something totally different with it, right? Or do you think they're going to keep those? Do you think they're going to do the M thing with Judi Dench, where they're here, but like it's a new day? I don't know.
I was going to say, because didn't the actor play Q for a long time before Ben Whishaw?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they could just do. I mean, I wouldn't mind like Ben Whishaw still being around as Q.
But I guess the difference is that Bond dies in this, so like how do you, I guess that's what makes it different. It's because you could just sort of move from Connery to Moore and sort of assume it's the same guy. Those are so standalone. Those movies don't really go together, so you could just sort of suspend disbelief there.
Yeah,
but you can't really do that in this where it's so serial.
Right, but I think, I don't know, I just feel like if they try to keep it going with the supporting characters, that kind of takes away from the finality of the ending and being like, this is it for Bond. Like, or this is it for whatever 007 or whatever. Because if they were just like, and here's a new 007 in this universe, it just feels, I don't know. It just doesn't, because like I said, there's the ambiguity to the other Bond films in that, like, is it the same Bond, like as a character, or is it like a new Bond? It's like every film sort of different in that respect. And so I would think the easiest option would just be like, if you want to keep like the epicness of whatever of this film, just kind of wipe your hands, be like, okay, we finished that version of Bond. Let's just start from scratch. And I feel like that would be the most fun, inventive way, and like kind of just see where the character should go from there. My concern is that they're going to, I mean, nothing against Tom Holland, but I feel like they're going to like pick Tom Holland and try to like Marvelize Bond. And that's what concerns me, where he's going to be like, well, that happened, and like do things like that. And like, I don't know.
Well, that happened indeed. One thing we do know, though, one thing that has been made clear, that is Barbara Broccoli, she's on the lookout. You know, Michael G. Wilson, they're looking for the next Bond. They've said as much, that like the name James Bond is still going to be out there, at least for the time being. We'll see if that holds. Mm-hmm. But that is, I guess, the plan for now. I hope we get some time, because I think apart from like, people need time to sort of sit and marinate with this part of the franchise that was so long. It's a very long time for a single Bond, relatively speaking. And I think that, once we get past this, once we actually get into a new era of action films, maybe the answer will become clear. But we need that time to gestate. We need a rest. And then we'll be ready for anything. We'll be ready for the next mission.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are several avenues they could go. I don't know which one is best for the franchise at this point. But as I've told you, I mean, if I had to throw a name in the hat, I'd probably pick John Boyega, because I think it would be fun to see him as Bond. But maybe he has too much star power with the Star Wars films. I don't know, but I don't know. The future is unwritten.
I think the Bridgerton guy is my other pick.
Renee. I can see. Yeah, he could pull it off.
Yeah, I'm looking up because I can never pronounce it correctly. Regé Jean Page, is that how you say it?
Yeah,
love him.
Sorry, yeah, Regé. Yeah.
I think he's like the right age. I think he's like young, but not too young. I think that he could really grow into it. I think he's really. I liked Bridgerton enough to see him in more things. So yeah.
How old is he?
He's 31.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
he's my age.
If they get on it, I mean, I just don't think they should pick anyone that's older than 35. It's like the opposite of the U.S. president. Like, they need someone that's not 35 or older, I think, at this point, if they want to keep the franchise like going long term.
That's a sweet spot.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find out someday what they're going to do. Until then, though, we've just had our conversation about No Time to Die and lots of Bond things. We finally had our Bond conversation. It was long, but it was needed because we've never really gotten into it before with Bond. Not maybe, to this extent.
Maybe we'll have, like you said, if they, whatever, 2 or 3 years from now, they're just like, another Bond film, we're doing it over again. It's this guy now.
And they blame us. They're like, well, John and Will told us to do this. They said they gave us the 35 rule.
Sure.
Well, I should march into the MGM offices.
Yeah. Because people always listen to my opinion in Hollywood.
They do. You're right. We should elect the next James Bond. No, don't do that. The internet will elect South Park.
It will pick like Pete Davidson or something. Like that's what will end up being Bond.
If you like our show, subscribe.
A can of Mountain Dew is Bond now.
We really appreciate you listening, especially if you listened even before you saw the movie, even though I hope, don't get mad at us, since we just spoiled the heck out of a lot of stuff. We'll be back for the show next week, I think. What are we talking about again? I already forgot. Venom? Yes, Venom, Let There Be Carnage.
Yeah, Venom is going to be... Yeah, and then the week after that, I think we're going to do Titane.
Titane? Yeah. That was the deal. It was like, we're not going to do No Time to Die as next week. We're going to do Titane, which I just watched today. And that's going to be a conversation.
I'm very excited. Yes.
I'm not.
I'm looking forward to it. All right.
I think there's going to be some road rage. You know what I mean? See you next time. Thank you so much for listening to our show. Be sure to subscribe to Cinemaholics on your favorite podcast app of choice or find us on YouTube. See you all next time.